to say when you want to start.
Okay.
We start now?
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right. Good evening and welcome everybody to the Speaker of Hackney's Prostate Cancer event in collaboration with Ero McCullough Foundation. We have a range of speakers tonight who will be talking about prostate cancer, how to detect it and manage it. And with that, I will hand you over to my co-host, Patricia Wharton. I hope you enjoyed this informative section. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the speaker for that fabulous introduction. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Patricia Wharton. I am a radio presenter and television co-host and presenter for a television show online. I'm always really excited when I get to host an event like this because it tells me that somebody's life is possibly going to be saved, or at the very least, somebody is going to receive some really useful and helpful information. So well done, and thank you to Hackney for inviting us to host tonight's event. I'm super excited. So a bit of housekeeping. The way in which the event is going to go, I'm going to introduce a couple of speakers, and there's an opportunity for you also, if you have any questions, to pop those in the live chat on the YouTube link. And then myself and Andrew, who is my trusted assistant this evening, it's all going to be in his capable hands to share those questions with myself, and our speakers will do their best to answer those questions. So it will be a series of interviews, then it will be followed by some questions and answers, and that's kind of how the evening is going to go. So I am super excited to tell you that the two guests today, speakers, are two people who I have met previously. Our first guest and that I will be interviewing will be the fabulous Professor Frank Chinigwundo, MBE. So I'm super excited. Following my interview with Frank, we're going to be having a conversation and a fabulous interview, I know already, with Errol McKellar, MBE, who is also the ambassador of Cancer UK. So without further ado, I want you to join me now in welcoming to our virtual stage, Professor Frank Chinigwundo, MBE. So Andrew's going to bring you to our virtual stage. Oh, that was really quick. I like that. That's fabulous. Just to let everybody know, today's event is being recorded. This means that you will be able to click on a link that will be made available for you to play this back, and also for you to share it with people who weren't able to attend the event this evening, because we are going to be talking about a very, very important subject. Tonight's topic, as you know, is about prostate cancer. So my first guest this evening is, as I've said, Professor Frank Chinigwundo, who is a consultant urological surgeon, and I'm going to ask him first of all to just tell us a little bit about your background, Frank.
Yes, yes. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Patricia, and thank you to Cam Adams for putting on this speakers event. So my background, as you said, I'm a consultant urological surgeon, which is the same thing as a consultant urologist. I've been a consultant now for 25 years. I work at Barts Health NHS Trusts, so in the East End of London. I was born and bred in London, of Nigerian parentage, so very familiar with London and the challenges it brings. Now, throughout my training, I developed an interest in prostate cancer because I saw that it was disproportionately affecting Black men. And that's
Frank, before we go any further, because we don't want to give away all the nuggets, can you just first explain to us what inspired you to become a surgeon, and then in particular, a urological surgeon?
yes. So when you go through medical school, you go through various disciplines. So you spend some time maybe in orthopedics, you spend some time in obstetrics and gynecology, you spend some time in cardiology. So you rotate through different specialties, and some appeal more to you than others. And I was drawn more to the surgical specialties. You know, I like the idea of not only talking and not only giving out, you know, tablets, but actually doing procedures and doing operations. And I guess, you know, if you're into immediate gratification, you know, when you do an operation and someone gets better and turns their life around, it's very satisfying. And so I was drawn to the surgical specialties. Now, within surgery, there's orthopedics, there's vascular, there's general surgery, there's neurosurgery, and so on. And so I just found, when I was doing the urology rotation, I just found that very interesting. And I liked the urological surgeons that I was being taught by and being trained by, and I could see myself doing the job that they were doing. And the more you get into a particular area, into a particular topic, the more interesting you find it. And so that's what I decided to major in.
So what is a urologist now, just so we can unpack everything so that everybody gets a real sense of what we're talking about this evening?
Sure. So a urologist is a surgeon. So the other term for a urologist is a consultant urological surgeon. They're interchangeable. And we deal with disorders of the urinary and genital system. So, you know, diseases that affects the kidneys, the bladder, the prostate, the penis. So it could be kidney stones, it could be bladder stones, it could be someone wants a circumcision, it could be someone who's got varicose veins around their testicles, it could be someone who's got cancer of the kidney, it could be, you know, it could be cancer of the prostate, you know, it could be incontinence, it could be erectile difficulties. So it's a very wide-ranging specialty.
That's quite vast. I had no idea that you covered that many areas.
Oh, yes.
We are going to be focusing on one particular area of your specialism, and we're going to be talking about prostate cancer. But before we become so specific, can you tell us what cancer is? What is cancer? It's a term that we hear very often, but what is cancer?
Well, there's many different types of cancer, as you alluded to. You know, over 200 different types. So cancer is essentially when the cells, which are the building blocks of every organ, when these cells grow uncontrollably. Because normally, you know, in any organ, the cells will grow, and then they'll die off, and then new cells will come in their place. You know, so there's renewal and growth. What happens in a cancer is that these cells grow uncontrollably with no limits, and ultimately overwhelm the body. So it's an uncontrolled growth of cells. That's what the cancer is.
Fantastic, because that makes it clear for lots of people. There is so much to the study that you've spoken about already, and the work that you do. And we have lots of parts of our body that we just often don't know the function really, apart from the obvious ones, your eyes, your nose, and your ears. But the more internal organs, we sometimes don't know the function of those. So can you tell us, what is the function of a prostate? What's its purpose?
Well, that's a good question. The prostate, I think the first thing I'll say about the prostate is that it's the size of a walnut. So it's about that size, and it sits underneath the bladder, and it sits in front of the rectum, and it has its main function actually is to produce much of that seminal fluid. So when the man ejaculates, most of that fluid is actually coming from the prostate gland. Some of it is sperm from the testicles, but most of that fluid is prostate fluid. And what that prostate fluid does is that it nourishes the sperm. So the way to think about it is that when the man has ejaculated, and those sperm in the prostate fluid are swimming, looking for the egg to fertilize that egg, the sperm get their energy from the prostate fluid. So it's a sexual organ. It's a sexual organ.
Fantastic.
And also, because the prostate sits underneath the bladder and it's got a hole in the middle of it for the urine to pass through, the prostate also plays a role in regulating the speed at which the urine will exit. But its main function is as a sexual gland.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. So can we bring the two together now? So our topic tonight is about prostate cancer. So you've spoken about cancer and the overgrowth of cells, and then you've spoken about the function of the prostate. What happens when you've got prostate cancer?
Well, just taking one step back, there's three things essentially that can go wrong with the prostate. It can become inflamed, which is a young man's complaint. By young, I mean 20s, 30s, 40s. Older men, the prostate can become enlarged and cause difficulty in passing urine, or it can become cancerous. So those are the three things that go wrong with the prostate. And in prostate cancer, the cells of the prostate gland grow in an uncontrolled fashion. And when these cells ultimately, without treatment, spread to other parts of the body, such as the liver or the bones, it depresses the function of those of where it spreads to, and that's what ultimately causes the man's demise. So it's uncontrolled growth of prostate cells. Uncontrolled
growth. So can I ask you, the three areas that you mentioned, it kind of might sound obvious that something inflamed you would know about it, or enlarged you would know about it. Is it as clear as that? Would a man know if he had an inflamed or enlarged prostate? Would he know that?
Not necessarily. It's only if the inflammation or the enlargement causes symptoms. So you can have a problem with your prostate and have no urinary symptoms. And okay. So you don't necessarily have to have symptoms for there to be a problem. And this is particularly important when it comes to prostate cancer. You don't have to have urinary symptoms to have prostate cancer. You can be perfectly normal, no problems at all, and yet you've got a prostate cancer that, if it's left untreated, is going to cause you a major problem.
So that's somewhat concerning, because I guess with some other conditions and other illnesses, there are some signs and symptoms that will mean that you will probably do something about that by going to probably see your GP or coming to yourself to see you. So Professor Frank, if there are no symptoms, what might bring a man to you who has, any kind of enlarged or inflamed, or in fact has cancer? How would they come to you if there are then no symptoms?
Well, I'm not saying that there are never any symptoms, but what I'm saying is that you don't have to have symptoms to have a problem with your prostate.
Okay.
However, there are symptoms that can indicate that you should seek medical attention. And the symptoms are the same, whether the prostate gland is enlarged or whether actually you have prostate cancer. So what kind of symptoms am I talking about? I'm talking about, the broad area is urinary problems. So, for example, the flow becomes slow and it takes you a long time to empty your bladder. So, so men will notice this because they'll be in the pub, they've gone to the toilet at the same time as their mates. The mates are on their second or third pint and the man is still trying to empty his bladder from the first pint, The other problem is if there's a delay before your flow gets going. So you zip down and you're waiting for things to start, and you're waiting 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and nothing's happening, and then it starts, okay? So a delay in getting your flow going, a slow, and then feeling that you're not emptying yourself properly. So you're not satisfied that it's all gone. And then also going more frequently than usual, having to get up at night to pass your urine, having problems controlling it. So as soon as you get that urge, you've got to rush immediately, otherwise there's going to be an accident. So these are the kind of symptoms that you may have. It doesn't indicate that your prostate's inflamed or it's enlarged or it's cancerous, but it indicates that there's some problem going on with your prostate.
Sure.
And so you should seek medical attention. At times, there's blood in the urine. That can be an indication of prostate problems as well.
Okay. And are these symptoms the kind of things that you might sort of be experiencing them, but they might not be sort of alarming initially? You might think, oh, need to go to the toilet, but might not necessarily think that you need to do something about it. In your experience, has that been something that you've had?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's one of the difficulties, in that certain things will happen as you get older naturally. Things slow down as you get older naturally. So trying to, for the individual man, trying to work out whether this is just normal aging or whether this is something more than that is very difficult, which is why you should seek medical attention.
Sure. So you've mentioned that as we get older, things slow down, or they change, or they don't work as well as they used to. Is there a particular age at which a man should kind of be thinking about any issues with his prostate?
I would say, if we're talking about the enlarged prostate, which is very common. In fact, half of all men over 50 will have prostate enlargement and begin to have some problems. Prostate cancer. So the enlarged prostate cancer, you're talking really from the age of 45 onwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Age of 45.
Yeah.
What is the sort of prevalence of prostate cancer? Tell us about that.
Well, it's the most common cancer now. Breast cancer used to be more common than prostate cancer. That is no longer the case. So in the UK, we're talking about 50,000 new cases of prostate cancer a year.
Wow.
And if we compare that with breast cancer, which is maybe 45,000, if we're looking at how many men a year die from prostate cancer, we're talking about 12 to 13,000 men a year. Breast cancer is about maybe 11 to 12,000. So more men die from prostate cancer than women die from breast cancer. And in fact, the statistics are that 1 in 8 men will develop prostate cancer. But if you look at the black men, it's down to 1 in 4. So black men are twice as likely to develop prostate cancer and indeed die from prostate cancer.
So, Professor Frank, it is no surprise to me that you have the title professor. Your resume is extensive and you've done lots of research, and it would probably take us the 2 hours to read through all of them. But because we don't have the time, I want to bring you to a particular piece of research that allowed you to recognize that the prevalence is different according to your culture, your race. Can you tell us about that piece of research? Yes.
So when I became a consultant in East London in 1996 and started doing clinics independently, I noticed quite a few of my patients were black men with prostate cancer. And that led me to ask the question, is this a real phenomenon? How many black men have prostate cancer? So I approached the Office of National Statistics, or its equivalent back then, and just asked a simple question, how many black men have got prostate cancer, in England?
And what was the answer?
The answer was that we don't know. We haven't got that data. And the reason they hadn't got the data is because no one had done the work to actually look at it. And so I thought it important enough to look into it in more detail. And then when I went to the literature, I found out that in America, it's been known for many years that black men have got a higher risk of getting prostate cancer than white men. But what we didn't know was whether that was the same in the UK or not. So when I was at Barts, I got a team together, and we looked at all the men who had had a diagnosis of prostate cancer made over like a 2-year period. So we got that list, and then we had to determine their ethnicity. And that wasn't straightforward because, in the late 90s, that wasn't collected routinely, or people were shy about telling their ethnicity. So for some of the patients, we could glean that from the hospital records. But a lot of the men, what we did is that we got permission from the ethics committee to ring up the men. So we would ring up the men and ask them. And if we couldn't get hold of the men, we'd ring up their GPs and just ask them their ethnicity. And so we had a list of all the men with prostate cancer. Then we were able to determine their ethnicities. And then we related that to how many black men were in the population, how many white men were in the population, how many Asian men were in the population. And then using the services of an epidemiologist, someone who's very clever and understands statistics,
Sure.
we were able to determine that your risk was, in fact, was 2.3-fold of being diagnosed with prostate cancer if you're black. This is just from our East London population. And that led me to collaborate with other colleagues, both in London and in Bristol, where instead of looking at 300 patients, as I'd looked at, we looked at 2,000 patients and found the same thing. And so we provided that data to the cancer registries and to the Office of National Statistics. And so when we published our data, they adopted that data. So anyone subsequently after me asking that question would be able to find out the answer.
That is a phenomenal piece of work, and just so important for people to have that information and to understand that you can be more prevalent according to your race. Not that I want to give you any more work or any more research, but I just wondered though, do we know why that is?
We don't know why. We don't know why. Some years ago, I published a paper in collaboration with some American researchers and also Caribbean researchers. And what we did was that we went back to the slave trade, and we went back to where those people were taken from the west coast of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and where they ended up in the UK, in the Caribbean islands, in Brazil, in the States, and we're able to demonstrate that that's where you had very high rates of prostate cancer. So it's something about the African diaspora that confers that much increased risk of getting prostate cancer. What we don't know is, what is it about being black that gives you that risk? Is it genetic? Is it a diet? Is there something else that we don't know about as yet? So that's the subject of a lot of ongoing research to understand what is it about being black that puts you at that increased risk. And, an interesting aside, we also have shown that your risk of getting cancer of your testicles, which is a young man's thing, cancer of your testicles is much less if you're black.
Oh. But
cancer of the prostate is much more common if you're black. So there's certain cancers, like myeloma is more common in black people.
Sure.
When it comes to breast cancer, what we call triple negative breast cancer is more common in black women, and that's a more aggressive type of breast cancer. And black women get breast cancer younger than white women. And with prostate cancer, black men get prostate cancer younger than white men get prostate cancer. But why? We don't know why as yet.
I think the great thing, though, is that you've uncovered some really important information. And I have no doubt that some more research will be going on to kind of find out a bit more about kind of like why that is. So we know that it is. Yes. And then I guess an understanding of why it is. It might be that there are some preventative measures, or that some legislations could change so that, there's a difference in terms of times at which people are tested.
I think that's a very crucial point. That's a very crucial point indeed, because the research that I've done and others have done have led to a change in NHS policy, or let's call it government policy, because before, up until this, what the government would say is that if you're a man of age 50 and you want to have this PSA blood test, which is the prostate cancer blood test, then your GP should do it after a conversation. And then, because of the research myself and others had done, showing that black men actually were younger, we were able to get a change in the policy and in the guidance that goes out to GPs, saying for black men it's 45, for white men it's 50.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's a value of research.
That is brilliant. And towards the end of the screening this evening, we are going to be talking about some more research that we're working on and whether we can get some other legislations moved. So stay tuned in. Don't forget, there's an opportunity for you to post your questions in the live chat. Our trusted Andrew will be going through those and he will be letting me know if there are any questions. It's fine if you don't have any now. We're going to be here for a bit longer. So take your time, but please remember to post your questions in the live chat so that we can address those both to Professor Frank and our next guest who's going to be coming up shortly. So we're going to be going to Errol McKellar shortly, but before we do that, Professor Frank, I just wanted to ask you, we've spoken about ethnicity and the difference in terms of the prevalence, but who's prone to getting prostate cancer, if I can say that?
Yeah, so the certain things put you at increased risk. I think the biggest risk is age, which you can do nothing about. So it's relatively unusual in men under the age of 50, for example, and it's much more common in men in their 60s and 70s. So age is a big risk factor. Ethnicity, we've spoken about being black. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, if you're Asian, your risk is much lower.
What's the prevalence for Asians?
Well, it's like something like 1 in 12.
1 in 12.
Yeah, as opposed to 1 in 8 for white men and 1 in 4 for black men. Why? And by Asian, I mean Indian heritage, Bangladeshi heritage, Pakistani heritage. I emphasize that because Asian in America means something different. It means kind of Chinese and Japanese and so on.
Ah, okay.
But so risk factors. Age, your ethnicity, and family history. This is really, really important. If you have, say your father's got prostate cancer, your risk is doubled that of one of your friends whose dad doesn't have prostate cancer.
Sure.
Okay. If you've got 2 of your male family members, maybe a brother, maybe your dad, both have got prostate cancer, your risk is quadrupled of you developing prostate cancer. So knowing your family history is important because it means that you should start getting yourself screened for prostate cancer and not waiting for the services to call you, which they're not going to.
Sure, they're not going to.
You have to take it upon yourself to say, I've got a family history of prostate cancer. I want to get this PSA blood test. The other risk factors are obesity. Okay, that's one of the risk factors for prostate cancer. Also, I mentioned the family history. It's not just the family history of the males, the family history on the female side is important. So if you have, say, a mother or a sister or an auntie has got breast cancer or ovarian cancer, your male risk of prostate cancer is increased. Yeah. So we need to talk to our families. We need to talk to our children. We need to talk to our elders, and find out their history. Certainly people in the past. I think things are better now, but certainly in the past, people would keep these things to themselves. And I've met many men who didn't find out that their father had prostate cancer until years after they had passed on. So we need to share this information. So age, ethnicity, family history, obesity.
Okay, super. We were going to go to Errol, but I can see he's left the screen for a bit. So before we do that, you've mentioned the PSA, which is the blood test. What other tests or examinations might someone go through?
Yes, so the most important test for prostate cancer is the PSA, which stands for prostate specific antigen. Another test that we do is a rectal examination. The only way of actually feeling the prostate gland is by putting a finger into the back passage, and you can feel the consistency of the prostate. So but you have to know what it is you're feeling for, and you have to have some experience. But for those of us that are experienced in feeling the prostate glands, the normal prostate, the benign, non-cancerous prostate, should feel like the end of your nose. Rubbery. Okay.
I feel like I need to do that now.
I think you should. I think you should.
Yeah, okay. So that's what
that's what a normal prostate feels like. Now,
okay.
If I feel a prostate gland and it feels hard,
okay,
then that's likely to be cancer. So,
How
so
long would that test take?
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
The man lies on his side. Doctor puts on a glove, puts some lubricating gel, puts his finger into the rectum, feels the surface of the prostate, and then out again. I mean,
so as soon as you touch it, you'll know. If it doesn't fill out the end of your nose, then there's something further to investigate.
That's right. Now, a lot of men, for various reasons, don't wish to undergo a rectal examination, and I say, no problem. But by far and away, the most important test is the PSA blood test. The PSA will give you the answer in terms of your likelihood of having prostate cancer, probably 95%. But there are some men that have prostate cancer where the PSA doesn't go up. And therefore is when the doctor feels it, he can say, this feels abnormal, even though your blood test is normal. So that's why ideally, you would have both the blood test and the rectal examination. But if you don't want to have a rectal examination, at least have the blood test, because that will give you kind of 90-95% of the information that you need. Yeah.
Are there any cases where you do the examination and the prostate doesn't fill out the end of your nose, but that it isn't actually cancer, that it could be something else?
Yes. I mean, that happens. If there's certain inflammatory conditions of the prostate where it feels hard. So what we do is that if the prostate feels abnormal or the PSA is higher than it should be, and the level of PSA depends on your age, if one of those two things are abnormal, then what we do is we organize an MRI scan of the prostate gland. Okay. And on the MRI scan, you can often see suspicious areas, and then you would take a sample from those areas. So yes, if the prostate is hard, then you would do an MRI scan. If the MRI scan looked normal, then that's the end of the matter.
And is there something else? So we've got the PSA, we've got the rectal examination, we've got the MRI scan. There's one other thing, right? There's something else. Is there a biopsy?
The biopsy. So to actually make the diagnosis, in fact, to make the diagnosis of any cancer, you need to actually look at the tissue. So, if you have a lump in your breast and you go to see a breast specialist, then they'll take a sample of that lump. They'll put a needle through the skin and take a small sample to analyze, in the lab, whether that's breast cancer or not. Similarly, with the prostate gland, you have to put a needle into the prostate gland, and there's various ways you can access a prostate. But essentially, you put a needle into the prostate gland, take out some of the thin slivers of tissue, and get it analyzed in the lab to get the answer as to whether this is prostate cancer or not.
Okay, wow. So just before we go to Errol, and we are going to be coming back to you towards the end of the show, but just to ask you, for everybody that is tested and they do have prostate cancer, does everybody require treatment, or can some cancers be left kind of untreated?
Yeah, so if you catch prostate cancer early, the success rate of treating it by one means or another is extremely high. If you catch it late, when it's already spread around the body, then although you can treat it, the results are not as good as had you caught it early. Now, 1/3 of prostate cancers that we discover early, we put these men onto what we call active surveillance, which means that we monitor the cancer, because many, in fact, probably most prostate cancers are very slow growing, and some hardly grow at all. And so you can monitor the situation. And if one of your tests indicates that the prostate cancer is growing, then you can launch in with your more radical treatments. So we don't have to treat all prostate cancers. We only treat those prostate cancers that we think if we don't treat them, they will go on and cause a problem, by spreading. But if the pathologist tells us that these cancer cells don't look very bad, they don't look very aggressive, and there's only a small amount of it, and the PSA is not very high, yes, we monitor these men.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. Professor Frank, you have given us some very, very useful, very detailed information, and you've shared some great research You've given some comfort that there's more research to follow.
Sure.
And we are going to have you back a bit later.
Okay.
But what I want to do now is I want to go to Errol McKellar, who is somebody who we're both doing some work with and who is a survivor, and he has a story to tell. So Errol, good evening and welcome. How are you?
Good evening, Patricia. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening to Hackney as well, which I'm very close with. And big thank you to Professor Frank. And before I start, can I just say thank you for asking the questions, the most frequently asked questions that I get asked every time I go out and do, any levels of seminars or meetings. You have asked the questions, and Professor Frank has given as many of the answers to the questions that you've asked that people need to hear, and that's why, thanks to Kem and Hackney, we're allowed to do this so that people can understand that it's important to have the right message. There's a lot of people out there that think that they're doctors. You've just spoken to somebody that's done the work, put the apprenticeship in, and has got the answers to the questions, and I think it's very important that people take that on board. There's so many, jumped up, misconceived messages. It's so frightening, right, what people are talking about when it comes to prostate cancer, and they need to hear the truth. So I want to applaud you and Professor Frank for asking the question one, and Professor Frank giving the answers that need to be heard. Because I know there's a lot of men shaking. I know there's a lot of men shaking after that.
Fabulous. Well, you've heard it from the man himself, Mr. Errol McKellar, MBE, who's also the ambassador of prostate cancer in the UK. Errol has a phenomenal story to tell, which is why he's able to thank the speaker, Cam Adams, and the team at Hackney, because this is such an important opportunity for people to hear from Professor Frank, and the story that we are now going to hear from Errol McKellar is not a story that I've heard just for the first time, but I have to say it's a story that every time I hear, I learn something new. So thank you for those of you that are posting your questions. I'm going to ask Andrew to remind me after I've spoken to Errol so we can get answering some of those questions. So stay tuned in. The answers are going to be coming shortly. Please keep the questions going. The more you ask, the more you get to know. So Errol McKellar, good evening.
Good evening, Pat. Good evening.
It is a pleasure to see you as always.
Do you know what? And it's ironic, and why I have a special thank you for Hackney is because my journey with prostate cancer, right, it really started in Hackney,
Nice.
For those, who have never heard the story, I'm going to tell the story. And for those who have heard the story, I will keep telling the story until they tell me that they've gone and had themselves checked. But yeah, my problems with prostate cancer started at the end of 2010 when my wife, Sharon, bless her, she was complaining about my snoring. And it got to the point, right, where, we had a bit of a debate about it one morning, and I just turned to her and I said, look, you know what, if it bothers you that much, you make an appointment with the doctor and I'll go. So, she did that, made the appointment. I went to the doctor, I sat in the reception, picked up a leaflet, read the leaflet, and I thought, you know what, I need to make an appointment to come back and do this test.
What was the, let's go back a little bit, Errol. What was the leaflet that you picked up?
The leaflet that I picked up was a leaflet from Prostate Cancer UK, right, mentioning prostate cancer information for black men. So, my curiosity made me pick it up. I picked it up and read the leaflet, and there was enough information in the leaflet to make me react and do something about it. So I thought, okay, let me go and make an appointment then to come back and do the test.
Sure.
So I get to the reception. I said to the young lady, I'd like to make an appointment to come back and do this test, right? She said, Mr. McKellar, you don't need to make an appointment. This is a simple blood test and it takes less than 10 minutes. And we can do it for you while you wait. So I had no choice. So there was no way I was going to get out of it then, because I was committing to doing it. So I did the blood test, didn't think any more about it, sat down, still waited to see the doctor about the snoring, which seemed to take ages. When I got home in the evening, Sharon was cooking dinner at the time, and I just turned to her and I said, guess what? While I was waiting to see the doctor about the snoring, I took a blood test for prostate cancer. So you immediately stopped cooking. And she turned and she looked at me and she said, what's that got to do with your snoring? And I'm hoping to this day that the answer that I gave her was a good one, because I did get my dinner that night, right?
We might check with Professor Frank if there's any correlation between snoring and prostate cancer. Andrew, that might be a question that I need to come back to a bit later. So, Errol,
No.
The quick answer, no.
No. And the reason, let me tell you, Richard, the reason why I tell this story about the snoring, and Professor Frank will tell you, is that a lot of men generally don't know, right, about the symptoms. They generally don't even recognize if they're having symptoms. And a lot of times we find out by accident, something else brings up the issue about prostate cancer. You go to your doctor for something else and something else pops in. And so that's one of the two reasons why, I always mention this story about, if it wasn't for the snoring and the significant, important role that my wife played in this, right, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
Absolutely.
A lot of men, it's a conversation that we need to have, right? Regardless of what we know and what we don't know, because women have a knack of noticing things, and listen, and I'm going to say a word that's not going to be pleasing for all men, but it's about preaching the word nagging, because this conversation about snoring, she was on to me for ages and ages and ages about it. And I then put it back on her by saying to her, you make the appointment with the doctor and I'll go. I didn't say I was going to make it. I said, you make it. And she did. So hence, and thanks to God, I'm here today, But,
so, Errol, this is a good point, I guess, for me to say to everybody that's tuning in via YouTube Live, that this show, although the condition is specific to men, it's actually a condition that we're all responsible for. We all have a role to play. It's important for both men and women to have an understanding of this condition. Professor Frank mentioned earlier about the relationship between, a mother or someone in your family having breast cancer or cervical cancer. This could be one of the things that you need to think about in terms of your family history. So if you are a woman and you're tuned in to the screening this evening, I want to say to you already, well done, because you are going to help to make a difference. Errol has already spoken about how his fabulous wife, Sharon, noticed a change in his behavior, as well as I'm sure it was keeping her awake, and she wanted to get some sleep. But I can see that it helped you, Errol, to go to the doctors. So back to you, Errol. So you've been to the doctors, you've had your blood test done, you've mentioned it to your wife, you've got your dinner. So what next?
And then just about a week after that first blood test, I got called back to do another blood test. And then to move the story on, after the second blood test, I got then called back to do a biopsy. And it was ironic, because when they called me about the biopsy, the doctor called me, he said to me, Mr. McKellar, we'd like you to come down to the hospital for a biopsy. So I said, well, when do you want to do that? And they said, well, we'd like you to come this morning. So I said, okay. So I put the phone down, and then I phoned Sharon. I said, Sharon, I've had a phone call from the doctor. They want me to come to the hospital this morning to do a biopsy. And so she said, okay, don't drive. She said, get a cab and I'll meet you there. So before I put the phone down, I turned to her and I said to her, yeah, but by the way, what's the biopsy? Because I had no clue what this word biopsy meant.
Sure.
I didn't register what it meant, put it that way. And she said to me, look, it's nothing to worry about. It's a routine thing that you have to do. And I'll see you at the hospital. And I'm kind of glad that she didn't go into detail about it, because what I have learned, right, and I know Professor Frank will sort of back me on this conversation, is that a lot of men go away with this idea that the biopsy is the first thing that you have to have done, and it's not.
Sure.
It is a PSA blood test. And men have jumped the gun with this one, because they immediately sort of put the barriers up. Oh, I don't want this and I don't want that. But there are reasons why you have to have certain things done.
But Errol, did you have 2 PSAs done? Were you called back for a second test, did you say?
Yeah.
So when you were called back for the second test, can you kind of alarm bells going off for you? Were you thinking, hold on a minute, I went to find out about snoring and now this is my second blood test?
Tell you what, Patricia, I relate this prostate issue to the motor car, and usually when something happens, right, I kind of look at it and think, okay, well, let's just keep an eye on it. So when they said to me about the second blood test, right, I didn't even think anything of it. I just thought to myself, okay, you know what, let me go and do another blood test, because I didn't take the first one as being serious, because my intention wasn't to have the first one in the first place. So I think I was very dismissive as a man to the importance of it. I understand a lot more about prostate and its issues right now than before my operation. That's the key.
So tell us now, Errol, you've been called back for the biopsy. You've contacted Sharon. She said to you not to worry about it. You go off for your biopsy. What was that like?
It wasn't comfortable, but what I have learnt is that you women go through far worse. So who are we? I'm a 20 stone man who's done door work, security work, but I'm sort of squeamish about having a biopsy. But when I sit down and look at what you ladies have to go through, I think we men need to man up, seriously.
Was this the first time? Because I guess, Errol, it kind of sounds like, you'd asked Sharon to make the appointment. Are you somebody before this that was unwell? Did you go to the GP, or were you somebody who was of good health?
No. You know what? I am probably a classic man, or I was then, a classic man who would just shrug off something or think, you know what, I'm not going to make a big fuss about this, right? I just roll my sleeves up and I crack on with it, because I just thought to myself, it wasn't something that I even understood, to be honest, and that's why I said I've learned more about the prostate issues and what it does. I've learned a lot more since I've had the problem.
That makes sense. So you're generally of good health before now. So with this happening, you weren't really alarmed. It was a couple of blood tests. So tell us about what happened after the biopsy. So you've had the biopsy. You said it wasn't the most comfortable thing.
No. So moving on, right? I then got called in to have a scan, and a week after the scan, they called me and Sharon in, and they sat us down, and the doctor said, "Mr. McKellar, your prostate is covered in cancer." So I got up and I walked out of the room, because I think at that point I went completely blank in this whole conversation. I came out of the hospital. I went and I sat in my car, and I think the word cancer must have hit me. And to this day, I don't know whether I was scared or frightened. I just remember bursting into tears, because I just felt completely helpless. I've always been somebody that has been able to manage a situation or to deal with a situation. And, I didn't have a plan. Well, I didn't even have a plan A, let alone a plan B. I didn't know what to do next. And I sat in that car and I felt helpless, and this is where the strength of your partner, your wife, whatever title you want to give the lady in your life. Sharon, she came in the car and she sat in the car and she turned to me and she said, "Listen, I've been with you all these years and I've never seen you quit on anything that you've ever done." So I had to wipe the tears from my eyes and I had to kind of man up a little bit. And I looked at her and I said to myself, is she having a go at me, or is this her way of motivating me to get up and do something?
Sure.
And I took the latter, that's what she was telling me, to get up and do something. So I said, come on, let's go back in and face the doctor. And we went back in. I said, "Doctor, what do I need to do to deal with this problem?" And he said, "Look," he said, "if we don't remove your prostate, you could be dead in 6 months." And, at that point, I then have to start looking at this whole thing as being really, really serious now, because, I faced many things in my life, but, to openly stand there and tell me that I'm carrying an illness that I wasn't even aware about until the first blood test, it just rang all the alarm bells. So I said, you know what, doctor, let's remove it. Let's take it out. And he said, look, there will be some issues that you'll have to deal with, and there will be some side effects that you have to come to terms with.
So we're going to talk about those side effects, Errol, but I just want to confirm. So your treatment was to have your prostate removed.
Yeah, I was given some options, but I felt with the options that I was given and at the age that I was at the time, I felt that the right decision was to remove it. If it was cancerous, I just thought, let's remove it. Because for me, as I said, I'm not Professor Frank. I'm Errol, the mechanic. And if someone comes into me and they said, look, I've got a problem with the brakes on my car, I'm replacing it. I'm taking it away. I'm taking out that bad part because it needs to be removed. So my attitude was, if there's something wrong with my prostate, let's take it out. Let's get it out. Let's not play around with trying to repair it or do whatever can be done with it at the time. I just said, okay, let's do it.
Do you know, Errol, that's a great analogy, and it's almost using in a very strange way, using some transferable skills from your profession to now address a very important situation that you've got to make in your life, because the brakes of somebody's car also can save a life. If your brakes aren't working, you could die. And so your prostate isn't working. Errol, we can see clearly that you've got MOT yourself, the Errol McKellar Foundation.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that you using the analogies of your profession to address your medical situation, a fantastic idea. And we're gonna come back. We're gonna come back to that.
Yeah.
So you've been told now that your prostate is going to be removed. What did that mean for you? What were you thinking about then?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. And I go back to something that Professor Frank was saying about conversations, because I didn't have this conversation. I completely switched off from this conversation. The night before, Sharon sat me down and she said, look, you've kind of completely shut yourself off from this whole thing since the doctor told you. She said, you've not taken anything in. So I need to tell you what's going to happen, right? So that you understand what's going to happen when you have this operation. And I think that was the reality check that I needed, because, and what I've learned from that is men need to prepare for this, right? You can't just, when you have this illness, you cannot deal with it by yourself. You have to ask questions, you have to talk, you have to understand. I mean, thanks to Professor Frank and his team, there's some fantastic technology out there now that was different to 10 years ago.
And some amazing research also. So, Errol, this must have been some really difficult news to receive. And you've more or less said you weren't sure whether you were scared, frightened, what was happening. You broke down. It was quite a lot. Who else were you thinking about at that time?
You know what? I was thinking about my mum, because, I lost my mum the year before I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And my mum, the last words that she said to me, she said, son, I'm not worried about dying, but I'm leaving you with good people. And this journey that I have been on, right, with the issues relating to prostate cancer, are the good people that I have met in this journey,
Sure.
And that was, because my mum was always somebody that I could go to for advice, I grew up with this, my mum used to give me a bowl of cornmeal porridge.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to say to me, when you eat that porridge, son, you won't be sick. So I ate my bowl of porridge and I ate my brother's bowl of porridge as well, because I thought, if I eat this bowl of porridge, I'm not going to be sick. So now I'm sick. My go-to person is not there. So yeah, it was a difficult period to come to terms with, and especially what was going to happen after the operation.
That's very scary. So, Errol, what was the period of time from diagnosis and being told that you would have to have your prostate moved
Well,
to actually having the surgery?
Well, I was diagnosed in between the end of sort of November to December. So it started in October, and the diagnosis came within that short period of time.
Okay.
And then the operation, I was meant to have the operation right in December. I put it back to January, and then I put it back to March, right? Because I said to myself, look, I need to put certain things in place that I hadn't put in place, right? Because I started to think, well, I might not come out of this operation. So I need to put certain things in place to make sure that my family, my wife and family, and and the people dear to me, that those things were going to be okay, and it would be no problem if I wasn't here. Because all of a sudden you have to start thinking of the reality of what could happen here.
Absolutely. Errol, listen, you've told a very heartfelt story. I'm going to ask Andrew we're going to pause for a bit, and we are going to continue to have some conversations with you. But I just want to ask Andrew if he could bring Professor back, maybe alongside Errol, because there are a few questions that we want. So if you're able to spot, fantastic, superb. So thank you, Errol, for that. We're going to take a few questions, and then we're going to come back to you. So our first question, Councillor Carolyn Williams, thank you so much, has asked, does COVID-19 pose risks by reducing the number of men approaching their GPs?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
So I guess the question is, has COVID-19 posed a risk?
Okay.
By, for men approaching their GPs?
Yes, it has. The figures are way down for the numbers of men that would go to their GPs, and therefore the numbers of men that would then be referred into hospitals. So I think that will have a detrimental effect, and we anticipate that we're going to be picking up more prostate cancers late than would ordinarily have been the case.
Wow, that's massive.
Can I add to that question as well, Patricia?
Please do.
It has made a massive effect because, last year there was periods obviously where I wasn't able to go out and talk to people about these issues, and collectively I lost 15 men last year to prostate cancer. Right.
Wow.
Reasons is they weren't going to their doctors, and they definitely were not going to go to the hospitals because they weren't sure whether if they went there they would be able to come back out. So
were they concerned that they might contract COVID?
I think that listen, it's an excuse that we get from our men. I haven't got time to go and do this. I haven't got time. And then when COVID kicked in, I'm definitely not going to be going nowhere near a doctor or a hospital because of the COVID. So it became a convenient excuse, if you like. I think Professor Frank will probably back me on that a lot of men used it as an excuse not to go.
And also, Professor Frank, I don't know whether you can add some more. Was that a condition actually that was kind of put on the back burner when COVID became very, profound for the entire world? Was that a condition that was kind of put back for a bit?
I think everything non-COVID was, and cancer was one of those conditions that was put onto the back burner. So all the screening programs, ceased for quite a period of time.
Wow.
And because a lot of hospital resources were diverted towards COVID, the normal treatments that one would do for certain cancers had to be changed because you didn't have the personnel, because the personnel were looking after COVID patients. So it's had a very, very big impact on cancer in general, and prostate cancer is one of them.
One of those, yeah. That's a detrimental answer, actually, and a very important one. So Councillor Carolyn Williams, thank you very much for that question. That's fantastic and very important. So I guess then, would there be some people then whose results might have come back and then they perhaps weren't informed, or nothing could be done once they'd. So pre-COVID, might people have had some tests, do you think?
I doubt that. I doubt that. If you had your results before COVID. So one of the things, so you would still be treated, but you might be treated slightly differently. So,
Okay.
so for example, if you were being lined up for a radical prostatectomy, which is a cancer operation to remove your prostate gland, because we weren't doing those operations during COVID, what would happen is that these men would be put onto drugs that would kind of stabilize the situation and keep the prostate cancer under control until such a time as the operation could be conducted. And so
Wow.
the cancer wouldn't journey, or the cancer outcome wouldn't suffer, but it means the men would be on tablets, for maybe 6 months that they wouldn't otherwise have been on.
Okay, super. Thank you very much for that. Our next question is from Councillor Kennedy. What lifestyle choices can be made to reduce chances of getting prostate cancer?
Well, I think the evidence base isn't hugely strong about this, but there's a lot of suggestive evidence. So I think what you eat is important. So eating less meat, more vegetables, more fruits. Very importantly, keeping your weight down. So the importance of exercise, importance of vitamin D, because we think vitamin D is protective against cancers, and in particular prostate cancers. So it means getting out in the sun and exposing your skin to sunlight, or if you can't do that, taking vitamin D supplementations.
Wow, so that's really important. So, there's an answer for you, Councillor Kennedy, that there are probably some things that you can think about doing. Also, Councillor Kennedy is relieved that snoring isn't one of the signs or symptoms. That doesn't mean, however, Councillor Kennedy, that you shouldn't do as Errol did. He went off to the hospital to find out that was the case. So, if anybody on the call is snoring, perhaps you too might visit your GP. So what have we got next? Topsy A says, what are the side effects of prostate cancer operation?
Yes, so the side effects of radical prostatectomy can include erection difficulties. It can include urinary control issues, so urinary incontinence, so leaking urine, which for most men it's temporary, but for a few unfortunate men that could be a long-term problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
So whilst we're waiting for, let's just see if there's any other questions before we go to, let's have a look. At the moment, that's it. So Andrew's going to keep them coming. So don't forget, for those of you that are tuned in to the live feed, to keep your questions coming. There are no silly questions. You can ask us anything you want, and either Professor Frank or Errol will give you the answer if they have it. And if not, we'll take your details and work out if we can get that information to you. Errol, were you going to say something?
I think what you will learn from this, particularly this evening, is how important it is to ask the questions. Whether they're silly or not. Listen. A lot of men have an issue with this. The erection problems, right? And it becomes a problem because they focus so much on it, right, that they forget that they still need to address the problem that is there in the first place. They jump straight to that point. Oh, well, I'm not going to go through this because I don't want to lose my bits and pieces. So I'm saying to them, so if you lose your life, you lose that anyway.
Absolutely.
And as I say, I will always go back to the car analogy because that's what I'm qualified to do. And the question I will always ask somebody is, when you drive down the road and the red light is on the dashboard of your car, what do? You come in to see me, right? So if there's something wrong with you internally, you should be making yourself an appointment to come in and see Professor Frank, because, when it comes to MOT in our bodies, that's what Professor Frank does. He does exactly what I do to that person's car. And one of the significant things I wanted to add to that is when I went back to work, right? I went back to work after going, for, having the issues that I had and, being out of work for nearly 6 months. And the first day that I went, it was at work fixing the cars that were coming in. A guy came in, we had a conversation, and, it was quite a pleasant conversation until, for whatever reasons it was, I turned to him and I said to him, when was the last time you had your prostate checked? And he looked at me, and the pleasant conversation kind of went, and his face was stern, and he was like, and he looked at me hard, and he said to me, what the bleep, bleep, bleep has that got to do with the gearbox on my car not working?
So Errol, you spoke about management light, and my light's gone out. So can I just ask you to bear with me for 1 second? I'm just going to add some light, and I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem.
Oh dear. I'm hoping that. Oh, just bear with me. Sorry. I'm hoping that's better. I'm back now. So thank you for reminding me about the management light, because he couldn't see me. So, so basically what you're saying, Errol, is that in the same way that we look after our cars, for those of us that are drivers, when the management light comes on, whatever your management light is, because actually in this case, Errol, I think Sharon became the mechanic and spoke to you about your management light and said that you needed to go and have your management light looked at.
And you know why I use this terminology? Because every year I have to MOT your car.
Sure.
I have to carry out a full MOT on your car. Every year, if it's an annual thing, Professor Frank has to do an MOT on somebody in terms of what he's checking and why he's checking.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no difference to the two. The problem is that, when I started to offer 20% discount if people went and got their prostates checked, right? More women took up the 20% discount than the men. Like, women came in to check their oil, their water, and their tires, right?
So were you encouraging the women to encourage their partners to have that? Is that what you were doing? Okay.
Right, but men were like that vehicle that was on the back of the recovery truck because it had broken down. That's when men came in and said to me, oh, look, I've got a problem with my car. And they're not driving it in like the ladies are driving it in to have it checked. It's coming on the back of a recovery truck because whatever has gone in the car has stopped working.
Altogether.
And that is no different to our prostate. The ladies used to say to me, look, I'm going to make sure I get my partner to go and do something about this. And they were great advocates to go out there and get this message. I used to get guys coming in and saying to me, look, my wife has fallen out of love with me, right? Because of you've given her this 20% discount. And now she says, unless I go to the doctor to get checked, I'm in this spare room.
So you were impacting the people that you worked with, not just fixing their cars, but also asking them now to take care of their bodies. We're going to talk some more about that, Errol, but we've got another question. The question says, what other treatment options are there and how effective are they?
So perhaps I'll take, happy to take that. There are several treatment options. The main three for prostate cancer that's confined to the prostate gland and hasn't spread beyond the prostate gland, what we call early prostate cancer. The main three are radical prostatectomy, which is major surgery. Then there's radical radiation therapy, which is where external radiation beams are fired over a period of weeks onto the prostate gland to destroy the cancer. The third main treatment is what we call brachytherapy, where we implant radioactive pellets into the prostate where they stay permanently. And as they give off the radiation, it destroys the prostate cancer. So those are the three main ones. And then in selected cases, it's possible nowadays to do what we term focal therapy, where rather than treating the whole prostate gland, we treat just that area where the cancer happens to be. And you can use extreme cold, called cryotherapy, or extreme heat, called high intensity focused ultrasound, to destroy focally, a small area of the prostate, rather than the big three treatments, which treats the whole prostate gland.
So that's really important information. That's really useful because I guess, to have a biopsy, that might feel a bit intrusive. To have the rectal examination, again, that might be something that, men are feeling a little bit uncertain about. And then to find that there are some treatments, if you are actually diagnosed with prostate cancer, it's about understanding that they are not all the same types of treatment. And your brother might have had a particular treatment, or your friend might have had a particular treatment, but it doesn't mean that you will have the same treatment. So therefore, it's great to share, but just remember that somebody's story might be somewhat different from yours. And it's really important for you to find out what bespoke treatment you will have. Professor Frank has spoken about the focal treatment, and so that's just an area. Errol spoke about having a complete removal of his prostate, and that there are some other options. So that's really, really, really useful. Another question says, how often should you get checked for prostate cancer?
I think the simple answer to that is once a year.
Once a year.
Yeah, I mean, like many things in medicine, there's nuances to that. But I think the simplest thing to do, and you won't go wrong, if you have it checked once a year.
Yeah.
Once a year. So I do want to just talk now to both Errol and Frank about that, because that's an important question. How often do I go? So for the women on the call, that we have a regular check for cervical cancer. We have a smear check, and we have a letter that comes in the post, and we're reminded until we actually have this done. And when we get to a certain age, we also have the breast screening test. But to Errol and Frank, I want to talk about the fact that that is the case for women. But is this the case for men in relation to prostate cancer? The regular reminders.
Can I just I'm going to say something about this before Professor Frank says what is going to be very, very important, right? Now, every year, right, you have to MOT your car, right? It's illegal to drive your car without an MOT, right? Yet, every year, you can have a cancer that develops and it becomes worse because you choose to do nothing about it. Now, for me, that's the most simple comparison that I can make to it, right? Professor Frank's gonna break it down to you in a more medical term. But the brutal answer for me is, why is it illegal to drive your car, right,
Sure.
without the MOT, and yet, you don't have the same attitude about your body?
Absolutely. I think before that's a great example, because what happens, if you don't MOT your car, things go wrong, breaks down, it stops working. So most people that drive know that. And so that's a really great analogy to use. Professor Frank, in answering that question, Sem Moema, I hope I've said that correctly, asked the question, should men who have reached a certain age get themselves checked every year? So I'm gonna hand it over to you now.
Yeah, from the age of 45.
Okay, from
the age of 45, they should go to the GP once a year and ask for the PSA blood tests. And it's the right to have it, actually. And it's a very cheap blood test, so there's no reason to deny it on the basis of costs at all. We don't have screening for prostate cancer, so men don't get those invitation letters for the cervical smear. Men don't get those letters to go to for a mammogram, And I think that's wrong. And I've been lobbying the Department of Health for the last 15 to 20 years about this. And there's a group of us that are actively lobbying, and we're trying to garner political support, cross-party support for this. Now, there's a committee called the National Screening Committee, and this is a committee that's set up to look at all the screening programs and whether they should be introduced and whether they should be continued. And the National Screening Committee, even as late as this year, have again decided not to screen for prostate cancer. And myself and others in organisations that I'm, work with, such as Cancer Black Care, Tackle, CHAPS, Orchid, Prostate Cancer UK, we have serious issues with the reasons that the National Screening Committee are coming up with, and quite flatly, I think they've got it wrong, and they've got it badly wrong.
Are you able to share some of those reasons? Because that's quite a serious decision to make. Are you able to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, so one of the reasons that's they said, going back some years as to why there wasn't screening was because the PSA is an imperfect test, meaning that at times the PSA is high, but actually the man turns out not to have prostate cancer.
Sure.
And the converse can be true. The PSA can be normal, and yet that man turns out to have prostate cancer. So it's not like 100% test, but the fact of the matter is, it's the best test, that we have.
Mm.
The other objection from the National Screening Committee was there evidence that if you were to screen the population of men, that you would actually reduce the death rate from prostate cancer. And we were able to say and point to a European study. I mean, UK didn't take part in this study. There was a European study that is now, I think, something like 18 years out, 180,000 men being screened for prostate cancer, and a reduction in death rate of 25%.
Wow.
So you can no longer say there isn't the evidence that if you screen, you'll save lives. Then the next argument was, you would be over-treating men. In other words, you would take out men's prostates, or you give them radiation, and if you'd left them alone, nothing bad would have happened to them.
Apart from death.
Well, apart from death, but it was on the basis that a lot of prostate cancers may just kind of lie there dormant, and therefore, if you find it and it happens to be dormant and you treat them, then you haven't done the man a favor, because that wouldn't have caused him a problem. And so now we've countered that by this active surveillance, where we don't automatically treat a prostate cancer. We look at the cancer cells under the microscope and so on, and decide if it does need treating, and if it does, then we treat it. But if it doesn't, and we can monitor it by regular blood tests, regular MRI scans, then we reduce what the committee would call the over-treatment rate. Okay, so we're able to demonstrate, and for reasons that myself and quite a few others, really struggle to understand, they choose not to share our viewpoint. And and even if you take it back to the basics, this is the main cancer killer of men in the UK. In fact, if you even in the States and in many places in the world, what are you going to do to reduce the death rate? You can only reduce the death rate if you find it early enough that you can that you can treat it. And the only way that we have, although it is imperfect, is using the PSA blood test. And so, the powers that be that have decided against screening are unable to answer the question. So what are you going to do about it?
That is seriously frustrating.
Oh my!
Very, very frustrating.
Oh my goodness! It is. It is.
And for somebody also who whose family's been impacted by this very condition, and somebody who's a mother of sons also, I find this quite worrying, as you know. So I'm going to go to Errol now. Errol, what's your thoughts around around this?
You know what? I'm very angry about this because, you know, I did a meeting with doctors and urologists, and I asked them this question. I said, how many of you guys drive a car in here, right? There was 62, maybe a little bit more people in the building, right? Every one of them put their hands up, right? So I said to them, look, the red light on your car is a warning, right? It's a warning indicator. Now, no different to the warning indicator that we're going to get when the alarm bells will ring about prostate cancer, right? When that red light comes on, you are supposed to go and get it checked, right? Now, there is no reason why we can't have a screening, right, for this issue. If, you know, the warning light is the same as somebody potentially having a cancer that is the biggest killer of men, right? Because that warning light can be you know, we have this computer that we plug into the car and it tells us what's wrong. That's how advanced the motor car is. But that has come from similar, you know, similarities to Professor Frank looking at somebody and saying, well, look, you know, you've come in here because your warning light is telling you something is wrong. Now, clearly, right, there is no difference between the two, right? But yet this one, which is the motor car, is more serious than this one, the life issue.
I think it's fair to say that myself, Errol, and Professor Frank are continuing to work towards this change.
Yeah.
Don't forget to put your questions in the live chat. Andrew is going to send those across to me and we will have your questions answered. We are speaking today about prostate cancer. We're speaking with Professor Frank Chinegwundu, MBE, and we are also speaking to Errol McKellar. Errol McKellar is a survivor of prostate cancer and also the UK ambassador and somebody who does lots of talks like this. So if you're on this call today, because we want to say thank you to Cam Adams and the Hackney team, if you're on this call today and you feel that this is a very important message, we ask that you share this message. But before you share, we ask that you ask some questions so that you can have some more information to share. The more you ask, the more information we can share. Errol, can I ask you if anyone else in your family, Dr. Professor Frank spoke earlier about it could be someone that's in the family. Is there anybody else in your family that had any form of cancer?
No, let me tell you how interesting that question is. Right, when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I went to my dad. I sat down with my dad. I said, Dad, I need to tell you, I've just been diagnosed with prostate cancer. My dad looked at me and he said, son, I had that 5 years ago. And I was so alarmed. I'm so shaken by that statement. I struggled to speak. Well, I didn't speak to him for 6 months, really, because of it. But when I started to go out and do these talks and these seminars, I realized this is very, very common, right? And particularly in the Afro-Caribbean community, that there's a lack of conversation. And when this happens, there are people out there who would rather suffer through fear and ignorance than try to address it or do anything about it. And that's why, you know, Professor Frank and myself, and you, Patricia, and everyone else that is involved in this campaign are preaching for people to talk, because that's the first part of diagnosing whether there's an issue or a problem. You know, these two things can be addressed. An issue can be dealt with, a problem can be solved, but they can only be dealt with and solved if we openly have a conversation. You know, I was angry with my dad, but my dad was one of many. You know, people have said to me, they said, look, you know, we didn't even know. I mean, I'm going to give you an example. I was at a Grenadian fair, right, last year, and I spoke to a guy who was very, very aggressive, very anti, wants to do a test, not interested, he said. I'm not interested in this conversation, right? He said, I think what you're doing is not the right thing. So I said to him,
it's not the right thing that you're telling people about it.
Yeah. So I said, okay, Right. So let me ask you a question then, right? Because if that's your decision that you don't want to hear about it, I said, fair enough. That's up to you. I said to him, how many kids have you got? He said, I've got 5 kids. I said, how many boys have you got? I've got 4 boys. So I said to him, so are you going to stand here and tell me that your 4 sons do not have a choice whether they should live or die? So he said, well, that's a bit brutal, isn't it? I said, well, that's what this cancer does. That's prostate cancer, as Professor Frank has already said, right? You know, do something. Don't just ignore it because it's not going to go away. If you've got a problem with your prostate, it's not going to go away unless it's treated, right? And we have to get this quite clear. And to understand about treating it means you need to know what's going on with it. And
Sure.
I'm going to go back to that guy now. He went away, right? And about 3-4 weeks later, he phoned me up and he said, look, I want to apologize for my behavior, but I think I need to share with you something very, very important. You know, I went home, I spoke to my sons about it, right? My wife got involved in the conversation. So bearing in mind, he hadn't spoken to his wife about it. He spoke to his kids about it. And they all clearly had some disagreement about it anyway, to the point where he and his sons went and got themselves checked. And he said, look, I was, my check was fine. There was no problem with me. But my second son was diagnosed, right, with cancer in his prostate, right?
Wow.
And because he has gone in there early, right, he, and he said to me, right, and he said, look, he said, this conversation you were having about early detection is far more important than any conversation that you can have about prostate cancer, because people don't understand that. So, and that's what he was trying to tell me. He didn't get the point I was trying to get across.
That's really useful.
Yeah,
That's so useful, Errol. But can I ask Professor Frank then? So Errol's given us a great example of kind of doing something about this once you're aware of it. If prostate cancer is protected early, I'm not really sure even what timescale I'm referring to here, but if it's detected early, how long could somebody live for with prostate cancer, or having had the?
Well, you could live, and most men will live their natural lifespan. That's
fantastic. So that's even more reason why, we should. They say prevention is better than cure. So it is great that people are receiving some information. Councillor Kennedy, thank you. Says that the frustration's been heard with the National Screening Committee, and if anybody on the call has any idea or suggestion as to how we can make a difference to this decision that's currently being made, we'd love to hear from you. If there's somewhere that you want to assist myself, Errol, and Professor Frank in trying to make a change, please do put some contact details in so that Andrew can collect those and somebody will get back to you. So we are talking about prostate cancer. We're talking about early detection. We're talking about the importance of your family history. We're talking about the importance of awareness. Errol McKellar is saying, as a mechanic, he's saying, MOT yourselves. You MOT your cars. He's saying, MOT yourselves. We've spoken about snoring. Who knows? There might be some other things that you're doing. I don't know what you might be doing that sometimes, I guess, we don't recognize in ourselves that we've been doing it. So we might not notice that we're going to the bathroom more frequently. We might not have really thought about it. And then it's important for our partners to say, actually, do you know you've been going to the toilet more frequently at night? Because sometimes we're busy getting on, we're busy doing, and we forget to stop and check ourselves and have an MOT. So keep the questions coming. We'd love to hear from you. Professor Frank, I think you touched on some of the work you do outside of all of the amazing surgery that you do and all the consultations that you do. You're a part of some organisations, and I think one of them you mentioned was Black Cancer UK. Have I said that right?
Cancer Black Care.
Cancer Black Care. Tell us about Cancer Black Care.
So Cancer Black Care is a registered charity. It's been in existence now over 25 years. As it happens, it started in Hackney.
Oh,
It started in Dalston Lane, and this is 25 odd years ago. Funded in the main by the equivalent of the CCG. It might have been the PCT, or let's call it the local health economy. Okay. And spread to Lambeth, and then we had another branch in Brent. One of the things that happens in the voluntary sector is, when the funders get squeezed for money, then they squeeze the voluntary sector. So we had to kind of close down in Hackney and in Lambeth and focus on Brent. Mm. So it's a charity that punches above its weight. It's got a very small number of paid staff. It's got various volunteers, and we support people with cancer.
What's your unique selling point, for the want of a better word, around that?
The unique selling point is really the ability to support Black and ethnic minority cancer sufferers, because the staff understand where they're coming from. They understand the social background. They understand things as to how they conduct their lifestyles. They understand the importance of faith in those people's lives. And so what we do is we support them. And we found that over the years, although there's other, bigger, better known mainstream charities, the people that come to Cancer Black Care feel that they don't get the support from the mainstream, because they're not talking to people who look like them or sound like them, or even understand the language that they use. Oh. And there's a lot of nuances to the, to the way English is spoken, say, by a Black African or someone from the Caribbean, which, the mainstream organizations might not necessarily understand. Even the terminology that we use for erection problems is, you have to kind of be in the community to understand some of the terms that are used, and
sort of cultural intelligence.
It's cultural competence, cultural intelligence, and so Cancer Black Care provides that support by counselling. So there's people who need counselling to get their heads around what's happened to them. There's people who need help with the welfare and benefits. There's people who might need help with their housing, and who don't necessarily have the skills to make their case, to the authorities. So there's a lot of one-to-one work. And there's phone calls coming from all over the place wanting information. We also do research, or universities like Bristol University were looking at the role of diet and exercise and lifestyle changes in prostate cancer. So they approached us. We got the focus group together. They interviewed all these men, and were able to publish their research. And we've linked up with Leicester University, and also Warwick to do research to advance the knowledge base of cancer and how it affects the Black community. The other important thing that Cancer Black Care does is lobbying. So for example, lobbying to get the age at which a Black man could have his PSA, not 50, but 45. Sure. So that requires lobbying. That requires the Public Health England to change their documentation and their leaflets and their brochures and the information they impart to GPs. We lobbied to get a change in the breast prosthesis. So 15-20 years ago, if you wanted a breast prosthesis because you'd had your breast removed, you could only get a pink one. Because that's these were being manufactured in Germany, and so as a black woman, you would have to get a pink prosthesis. And so Cancer Black Care and other organizations lobbied to say we should get brown prosthesis.
How fantastic!
When it comes to getting wigs, you have your chemotherapy and you lose you may lose your hair. Can you get wigs as part of your NHS treatment? You could if you get a white wig, but what if you're a black woman? So, but now you can. So these services just don't happen. You know,
Sure.
They arise because people, Cancer Black Care and others, actually lobby the health authorities and lobby Public Health England and say, you know, we need this to serve, you know, the interests of our community. So, you know, I sit on the bowel screening advisory committee, which again is one of these, you know, Department of Health committees. So when they're introducing colon cancer screening and they're wondering why is the uptake less in black people's and in white people's, you know, they need someone from who understands the community to say to them, actually, have you thought of this, or have you thought of that? You know, breast cancer screening. I remember going to all these, you know, because, you know, I've been kind of well connected over many years to the kind of, you know, cancer committees, you know, Department of Health committees and so on. And I would go along year after year after year. They'd say the uptake of breast cancer screening in black women in London is like 20 points lower than white women. And next year I get to the same, you know, Britain Against Cancer conference, and then the department would trot out the same statistics. And after about the third year, I said, well, what are you doing about it? Why are you telling us year after year that, you know, the rate of uptake in black women is less? What are you actually doing about it? You know, are you serious about doing something about it? And then I said to the head of this, you know, the screening programs at the time, a lady called Julietta Patnick, Professor Patnick, who's now retired. I said to her, I can improve the situation, but you have to fund us to do that. So we collaborated with another black charity called Better Days Cancer Care. We got the Public Health England to give us money. Then what we did was that we employed 2 black women, and we did a project in Lambeth, Southwark, and Lewisham.
Sure.
And what we did is we linked up with the King's Hospital, which is where the screening centre was. We got a list of something like 600 black women who'd been invited for the breast cancer screening but hadn't attended. And then what we did with these 2, we called them patient navigators. So these were 2 black middle-aged women to contact each of these women who hadn't turned up for the breast cancer screening to find out why they hadn't turned up. And there's a whole long variety of reasons why they hadn't turned up. But these women were able to explain to them the importance of going, and also were able to plug them directly back into the breast cancer screening centre at King's. And so we increased the uptake by about 1/3 of these women who had not attended. We got them to attend. And then this was published on the national screening kind of website. And then we said, so I said to the Public Health England, you know, if you are serious about increasing the uptake of breast cancer screening in black women, this is what you have to do. You know, it's no good just sending out the bog standard letters saying come on such and such a date, because you don't understand the reasons why these women are not coming. They have so many other things going on in their lives, you know, both here and overseas. But if you talk to them on a one-to-one basis and explain the importance, then you will increase your uptake. And then sad to relate, they basically said it's too expensive, can't afford it.
Wow.
And so, you know, after a year, that was it. That was the end of that. So despite showing that actually you can make a difference, you just have to use a different approach.
I mean, that's almost a whole...
They say it's too expensive.
It's almost a whole different Zoom, isn't it? That's almost an additional Zoom on top of the one that we're having today.
Yeah,
but what I do want to say, though, Professor Frank, is that I do want to say thank you for actually being at some of those decision-making tables, because often when we're not there. Absolutely. So I do want to say thank you for being there. I do want to say thank you for making the difference. I do want to say thank you for the research. And you've actually opened another aspect to having prostate cancer or cancer. We've spoken about breast cancer as well and why that's important. The aspect that you've opened is a bit like the COVID question. So lots of people were talking about COVID and people dying about COVID. What they're not talking about so much is the secondary impact of either knowing somebody that's having COVID or having COVID yourself, or somebody dying from COVID, and all of the other things you've spoken about, wigs, and the fact that if you have to have your breast removed, what color is the prosthetic breast that you're going to get? Is it going to be anywhere near your skin color? You've spoken about wigs and that kind of thing, and you've spoken about counseling. So Errol, I want to go to you now and ask you, based on that, how did you having prostate cancer impact the rest of your family?
Well, it's, do you know what? It certainly, those that wasn't close, it's brought them closer. And you know what? From my experience, I've been able to share with everybody in my family and beyond, because the one important thing that we must remember that Professor Frank is saying, there's a care of duty to somebody who is suffering, you know, because when you have an illness like cancer, right, it's not just the physical part you've got to deal with. You have to come to terms with the mental side of dealing with that word cancer. And that's a tough one.
How did you do that, Errol? How did you deal with the psychological aspects of it, or
Right.
any within your family?
Yeah, me personally, right, I've, you know, as I said, you know, I've always been somebody that's been able to pick myself up from a situation. This is the toughest thing that's ever happened to me personally, right? But I take my strength from my wife, Sharon, right, who has told me on numerous occasions that this cancer has only knocked me down. It hasn't knocked me out, you know, to the point that she even said, look, you're going to go 12 rounds with this cancer. But what you'll do is you'll take people like Professor Frank and yourself and Mr. Kem, right? You're going to take all those people in there so that at least you give yourself a chance of winning it on points. So you have to try to have a positive approach about dealing with something on a mental issue, because, you know, listen, we talk about, you know, the mental issues of everything now. Everything has a mental relationship, you know, and any illness that you have, particularly cancer, is going to trigger that mental side of you. And
Sure.
you as an individual, you got a choice. You either sink or you swim, right? And I said, no, I need to learn to swim. And if what's happened to me, if my God has kept me alive, right, then my motivation is to get up and save one life a day. That's what my motivation is.
Fantastic.
And that's why I set this charity up, because I don't want people to come on board and just donate money. I want them to come with ideas, because, you know, you, myself, Professor Frank, we're all trying to make a difference. One person is not going to make a difference. It's going to take an army of us to make a difference, you know? And, you know, Professor Frank and his team have done some fantastic research work.
Absolutely.
Right? The research work that wasn't there in the first place is there now. So what we are saying is, what I'm saying to the government and what I'm saying to the man on the street is, listen, come on board with this conversation, because you need to know the facts, right? You can do more when you know the facts than when you know nothing.
Fantastic. Well, of course, we are slowly but surely approaching the end of the event this evening. And we are going to leave some space for some final remarks from the speaker, Councillor Cam Adams. But before we do that, and sort of final remarks from both Professor Frank and Errol, can we just quickly talk about the work, that the campaign that we're working on now? I don't know who wants to kind of lead on that. I like to call it the man van.
Errol.
But let's hand that over to Errol before we sort of start wrapping up.
Because I think it's important for Professor Frank to bring it to where it is, right? I sat down with Sharon and I said to her, Sharon, I said, COVID has stopped me from going out to talk to people. What I need to come up with something to communicate with people. So, and she said, well, look at the tools that you've got. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, look, if I broke down with my car, what would you do? I said, I'd come out and get you, right? So she said, well, there you are then. So you would come out and recover me, right? It's the same as if you go out and do an MOT on somebody's car. So I thought, okay, I had to bite the bullet and say, that's another fantastic idea. And I sat down and then started to get the research together, right, to make this idea become a reality. And, you know, thanks to Professor Frank and his team, right, you know, we have come up with this idea of having a mobile testing vehicle, right, equipped to do a PSA test. So what we are actually saying to people is, okay, you're not going to the doctors, you're not going to the hospitals, so we are coming to you. So we are bringing the MOT yourself to you. So there ain't hopefully no place for people to hide, you know, because the research work is just as important as doing the PSA, because we want to be able to create the data that Professor Frank and his team can work on to analyze what it needs going forward, because it's living people that you need to be able to come up with the answer to these questions. And that's
so basically, the reason I call it the man van is because it's an amazing vehicle. At least our visual creativity shows that it's not yet something that we've got already, but it is the van. So for women that go to have their breast screening, this might be done in Tesco car park, or it might be in the IKEA car park for a while. So what we're talking about is bringing this vehicle out so that men can go and have you know, their tests done. So that's something that we're working on. So if anybody's got any ideas around that, if anybody wants to kind of share some information with Errol and the team, that would be fantastic. So we're going to take some final remarks from Professor Frank Chinigwindo, MBE. Are there any messages that you want to give to the people that have tuned in today? You might want to tell them about your MBE, or there might be some tips that you haven't already mentioned, but final remarks to you, Professor Frank.
Yes, thank you, Patricia, and you know, great questions that help illuminate the whole subject. So thank you for that. I think the main thing I'd like to leave men with and their partners is that we need to take responsibility for ourselves. And you know, if you know, the government have gone as far as saying if you go to your GP, then you can have a PSA blood test, but they're not going to ask you to come in to have it done. So we need to get the message out there about prostate cancer and make men aware that it's their right to have a PSA blood test. And you know, I'd like to say, you know, don't die in ignorance, you know, and be proactive. And it's interesting that that there's an organization which I've introduced to Errol called the Graham Fulford Foundation, and what they've been doing for at least 15 years is organizing mass PSA testing events. So pre-COVID, there'd be an advert in the local paper in the Ipswich or somewhere in Suffolk, or it could be in Harrogate, you know, predominantly in the Shires, saying there's going to be a mass prostate cancer screening program. The local Lions Club or the Rotary Club would sponsor the cost of PSA tests, and you would get 300 men turn up, and the nurse specialist from the hospital will come and do the blood test. It'll go off to the laboratory, and then 48 hours later, you know, the man would be sent a letter saying, yes, this is fine, or we suggest you go and see your GP.
And is that just a straight, they just turn up for a test and then they leave? There's nothing added to it. There's no entertainment, there's no football, there's no beer, there's no attraction, just straight PSA.
Just a straight PSA.
Oh.
And you know, I think it must be about 160 or 170,000 men now have had this, and you know, and this has been published in journals. So men are getting the PSA test done, you know, over and above those who go to the GPs. But you have to know about it. You know, you have to know that there's such a thing as a prostate gland. You have to know that it can cause a problem. You have to know about the PSA blood tests. So it is happening now. Since COVID, these mass events have had to cease. So what's been developed is a home testing kit. So you can apply to this foundation. I think it's a small charge for the kit. You get the kit, a finger prick, put it into this little cassette thing, and then send it off in an envelope, and then you get your PSA results back.
That's brilliant. So even a small amount of blood from your finger is sufficient enough to carry out the test.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then the other thing that's been developed is this iChroma point of care PSA testing. This is one of the things that we want to bring onto this van. So rather than waiting 48 hours for the sample to go to the lab, the result to come back, and then someone's got to write to you, we hope to be able to give you the results within half an hour.
Oh,
so there and then on this,
because I guess there's that level of anxiety from the time you've had any blood test. Actually, they say you can have it back in 2 weeks. So that kind of thing would alleviate some of the anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love the sound of that.
So we are working on the logistics, of doing that. But the main thing is, if you're a man over 45, go and get your PSA done.
Fabulous. I like that. Thank you so much for those final remarks.
You're welcome.
We're going to go to the man himself now, Errol McKellar, MBE. Do you have any final remarks before we hand back to the speaker?
Yeah, I'm just so happy that Professor Frank has said what he's just said. And I want people to come on board with us, come on board with the Errol McKellar Foundation.com, right? Help us in this MOT Yourself campaign, because it's going to be part of them, not just us, it's part of them. We want to make a difference. We want to make Professor Frank's work a lot easier by giving him the information. He can only have the information if people come to him, right, and actually do these tests, right? We can't look, the machine that Professor Frank is talking about, this is how fantastic this machine is, that it can give you this answer as quick as it can. But
brilliant.
Without people coming, right, to do these tests, we're still no further forward. So as it comes back to us taking stock of ourselves and doing this, I want people to come on board at the Errol McKellar Foundation.com and help us to make this happen.
Errol, thank you very much. I've got one final question. The snoring. How are we doing with the snoring?
I have to wear a mask, guys. I have to wear a mask, because they tell me that I actually stop breathing, right? So, it's called sleep apnea. So I have to actually wear a mask. But you know what? I will take the nagging and the mask because I'm still here.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
We're grateful. So it leaves me to say a very, very big thank you to everybody who messaged in through the chat. Andrew, I'm thinking there are no more questions. No more questions. Super. Thank you very much for everybody who attended this evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for your interaction and your fantastic questions. But I want to say now, wow, an absolutely massive thank you to Professor Frank Chinegwundu, MBE. He has been an absolute superstar. Thank you
very
so
much
for your great answers. You've been fantastic.
Thank you.
And then to the man himself, of course, the man who I've really grown to adore, his real tenacity, his big heart, his great sense of humor, Mr. Errol McKellar, MBE. Thank you so much, as always, fantastic. Now, there's somebody that I want to say thank you to who you don't see, but it's a bit like Columbo's wife. She is there. She's very much behind the scenes, and she helps support everything together, and she keeps Errol on track, which keeps us on track. So we want to say thank you to Mrs. Sharon McKellar, and I think she needs to have an MBE also. Thank you to her. So I am Patricia Wharton from the Let's Talk show. I have been your host for this evening. I'm now going to hand back to the speaker and thank the speaker, Councillor Cam Adams, back.
Right. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Patricia. Is it gone?
No.
You can hear me, yes? Oh, thank you, Patricia. Oh. What do you mean she's not finished? Yeah, she's finished from here. Yeah, thank you,
Sorry,
Patricia.
I dropped out. I'm
Yes.
back. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Patricia. I hope you have enjoyed this evening's virtual event. And thank you for attending, everybody, my colleagues, from Acne Council, the mayor, and all those people that tune in this evening. I hope you have found it very, very useful and informative. Please share the information among your networks so that we can fight back and save lives. I would like to thank Reverend Ledby for allowing us to use his platform for this evening event. Many thanks to Errol McCullough Foundation. That means Errol and his wife, Sharon, Professor Frank, Patricia, and all our speakers tonight who have briefly addressed this difficult topic. So thank you very much. I really appreciate, and I find it very informative myself. My dad died of prostate cancer, and my granddad died of prostate cancer. So it's an issue that really, really concerns me, and I'm worried about myself. So I've done my test, and thank you, and God bless. Have a nice evening. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, listeners.
Okay, take care.
Don't
Bye-bye.
forget, get
Thank you.
checked, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.